Big Questions by Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy was a very famous Russian writer whose realistic fiction influenced a huge number of writers of that period. War and Peace and Anna Karenina are the two most legendary innovations of Leo Tolstoy. It once occurred to a certain king in Russia before 1917. The emperor or the king was referred as Tsar, and in this story, he's referring as the king. It once occurred to a certain king that if he always knew just when to undertake everything he did, it says that once upon a time a king had a thought that if he knew when to undertake everything, when to do everything, and which were the right and which the wrong people to deal with, and if he knew who were the right people and who were the wrong people, so that he could deal with them accordingly. And above all, if he always knew what was the most important thing to do, and he also wished to know the most important thing to do in life, the most important deed to be done, then he would never fail in anything. Then he would always be then he would always remain as a successful king. Having this thought, after the thought had occurred to the king proclaimed throughout his realm, the king declared throughout his kingdom that he would bestow, that he would give, or he would confer on a large reward on anyone who would teach him how to know the proper moment for every deed. The king declared that he would give a large reward on that very person who would teach him the proper moment for every action, how to know which were the most essential people, and that very person would also tell him about the most essential people, about the most needed people, important people, and how not to err, how not to commit any mistake in deciding which pursuits were of the greatest importance. And besides, the person would also let him know what kind of works were of greatest importance. Learned men began coming to the king, but they all gave different answers to his questions. Learned men or scholars started visiting the king to give him the answers, but they gave him different kinds of answers. In reply to the first question, what was the first question? The first question said that how to know the proper moment for every deed. So, how to know the proper timing. So, in response to that first question, some said in order to know the right time for every action, one must draw up a schedule of days, months, and years and strictly adhere to it. So, in the opinion of the learned men, one must always follow the schedule and one must strictly follow it. Only in this way, they said, could everything be done at the proper time. And they believe that only doing so, everything would be done in the proper time. Others said it was not possible to decide in advance what to do and when to do it. Other learned men said that it was quite impossible to decide beforehand about the right work and about the right timing, that one must not allow himself to be distracted by vain amusements. And they also said that one must not entertain ineffective enjoyment in their life, but must be attentive to everything that happens and do whatever is required. But one must concentrate on everything that happens around him and do the necessary work. A third group said that no matter how attentive the king might be to do what was going on, it was impossible for one man rightly to decide the time for every action. The third group said that it was also impossible for the king alone to choose the right time to undertake the ongoing work, and that he ought to have a council of wise men and act according to their advice. So the king should have or should take advice from the council of wise men and act whatever they have said. The fourth group said that there were certain matters which required immediate decision. The fourth group of learned men said that many incidents happen that need to be solved very quickly, leaving no time to determine by means of consultation whether or not it was the right time to undertake them. They believe that certain incidents should be solved in no time, should be solved immediately due to their urgency. So in this case, one should not have enough time for consulting the group of wise men. In order to know this, one would have to know in advance what was going to happen. So in this case, the person should know beforehand that what was going to happen, which is something that only a magician can know. Therefore, in order to know the right time for every action, one must consult the magicians. The fourth group of learned men conclude saying that the king must consult the magicians because only the magicians can provide the knowledge beforehand. The answers to the second question also varied. What was the second question? The second question wanted to know about the most important people. So the answers were also different. Some said that the people the king most needed were his administrators. Administrators are the very people who organize or supervise business, school, or governmental affairs. Some said the priests, the clergymen, and some the physicians, doctors, while others said the warriors were the most essential, and many of them said that soldiers were of most importance. The answers to the third question as to what was the most important pursuit were equally diverse. So the answer of the third question were also variegated. Some said that science was the most important thing in the world. Some intellectual men said that the most important thing in the world was science. Some said military skill. Some opined military skill, and others religious worship. And others have said that the act of religious devotion. The answers were all different. Therefore, the king agreed with none of them and rewarded no one. So, in response to the third question, the answers were giving importance to science or military skills or religious devotion. They were all different from each other. So the king did not reward anyone for their answers. In order to find the true answer to the questions, he decided to consult a hermit who was famous for his wisdom. The king was not contented. The king was not satisfied with the confusing answers he got from the learned men. So he decided to visit a hermit, a famous hermit who was widely known for his great wisdom. Hermit refers to a person who prefers to live alone, distant from civilization. The hermit never left the forest where he lived. The hermit always lived there in the forest, and there he received none but simple folk. The hermit used to live in solitude, and he only received common folk, common people. The king, therefore, dressed himself as one of the people. So the king dressed himself as a common one, and dismounting means getting down or getting up. As he was a king, so he dismounted from his horse before he reached the hermit's dwelling. As king were used to move from one place to another, so he dismounted there before reaching the hermit's dwelling. Otherwise, the hermit would have seen him, and he left his knights behind and went on alone. The king was attended by his knights, so he bid them farewell and went on alone to visit the hermit. The king found the hermit digging a garden in front of his hut. What was the hermit doing? The hermit was digging a garden. Digging is an act of moving earth or soil to make a hole in the ground. So he was digging a garden. When he saw the king, the hermit greeted him. The hermit greeted the king and immediately returned to his digging. And after greeting the king, he returned doing his own work. He was thin and frail. He was very weak one, and each time he thrust his spade into the ground and turned a little clod of earth, he breathed heavily. Spade means the tool which is used for digging. Every time he dig a little lump of earth, a little clod of earth, he breathed heavily because he was getting exhausted each time. The king approached him and said, the king went closer to the hermit. The king addressed the hermit and said, I have come to you, wise hermit, to ask you for the answers to three questions. So the king said, addressing the hermit as a wise hermit, and then said that he visited the hermit to get three answers of his three questions. How can I know which is the time I ought to heed, not allowing it to slip by only to be regretted later. He asked that how can I know which is the right time? Which is the right time when to pay attention? Heed means paying attention, not allowing it to slip by only so that I do not allow the time to slip by and then regret later. This was the first question. Who are the most essential people? Who are the most important people, most crucial people? Those to whom I ought to give the greatest attention. Who are the people or to who should I give the greatest attention, the most importance? This was the second question. And what are the most important pursuits which therefore ought to be undertaken first? And what deeds should be undertaken first, or what deeds should be done first? This was the third question. The hermit listened to the king but gave him no answer. The hermit did not respond to these questions, but he had listened properly. He merely spat on his hands and started digging again. He spat on his hands. Spat is the past form of spit, and then again got back to work. You have exhausted yourself, the king said. The king said the hermit that you are tired. Give me the spade. I will work for a while. Then the king asked for the spade so that he can help the hermit digging the ground. Thanks, said the hermit. The hermit thanked him. He handed him the spade and sat down on the ground. The hermit handed the spade, and then he sat on the ground because he was exhausted. He was taking some rest. After digging 2 beds, the king stopped and repeated his question. The king worked for some time, and when he had done digging 2 beds, he repeated those questions. The hermit did not answer. This time also the hermit did not give any answer to the king, but got up and held out his hand for the spade. The hermit got up as he was sitting on the ground. He got up and held out his hand to get the spade, saying, "No, you rest, and I will work." The hermit said that the hermit asked the king to take rest so that the hermit can work now. But the king did not give him the spade. He went on digging. But the king did not give that spade. He continued digging. An hour passed, then another. So time was passing by. The sun had begun to sink behind the trees. Dusk was almost arriving when the king stuck the spade into the ground and said, Then the king said, "I came to you, wise man, for answers to my questions. If you can give me none, tell me so, and I shall return home." So the king was very clear. He was very clearly saying that the hermit should answer, whether he have the answers or not. If not, then the king would return. "Here comes someone running," said the hermit. Let us see who it is. Then the hermit said that someone comes running. Let's see. The king looked around and saw a bearded man running out of the woods. The king noticed that a bearded man came running out of the woods, out of the forest. The man held his hands pressed to his stomach, and blood flowed from between his fingers. The bearded man held his stomach tightly with both of his hands as blood was oozing out of it. He ran up to the king and fell fainting to the ground, where he lay motionless, weakly moaning. The man came closer to the king, fell on the ground, making low moaning sounds, expressing physical pain. The king and the hermit opened the man's clothing. There was a large wound in his stomach. The king and the hermit nursed the wounded man. They found a large wound. The king washed it as well as he could and bandaged it with his own handkerchief and the hermit's towel. The king not only washed the wounded area but also bandaged it. And to bandage that area, he used his own handkerchief and the hermit's towel. But the flow of blood did not abate, did not decreasing. It was continuously flowing. Again and again the king removed the bandage soaked with warm blood. Each time the king was removing the bandage because blood was flowing heavily and that bandage got soaked with that blood. The king washed that towel or handkerchief and rebandaged the wound. When the blood at least ceased flowing and finally the blood stopped flowing from that wounded area, the wounded man revived. The wounded man started recovering and asked for water. The king brought fresh water and gave him a drink. The king did so. The king brought him fresh water to drink. Meanwhile, the sun had set and it grew cool. It was the weather was changing. It became cool. The king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut. They carried the wounded man in the hut of the hermit and laid him on the bed. He closed his eyes and grew still. He was taking rest. The king was so tired from his walk and the work he had done that he lay down on the threshold and fell asleep. The king too was very tired because it was a long day for him. So he lay down on the threshold on the doorway and he had fallen asleep. And he slept so soundly through the short summer night that when he woke up in the morning, it was some time before he realized where he was. So in summer, the nights are usually short. The king had a sound sleep through that short summer night, and when he got up in the morning, he needed some time to recover where he was and recalled the bearded stranger lying on the bed. He remembered the stranger who was lying on the bed, who was now gazing intently at him with luminous eyes, who was looking at the king with bright eyes. Forgive me, said the bearded man in a faint voice. In a low voice, the wounded man asked the king for forgiveness. When he saw that the king was awake and looking at him, when the king looked at the bearded man asked for forgiveness. I do not know you and have nothing to forgive you, replied the king. The king told simply that neither he knew the wounded man nor he had any reason to forgive that person. You do not know me, but I know you. Now the bearded man had started speaking. His, he stated that the king was known to him. I am your enemy, and I promised to take vengeance, to take revenge on you for killing my brother and seizing my property and snatching my property. So the bearded man revealed that he is the enemy of the king and he had promised to take revenge for killing his brother and snatching their property. I knew you had come alone to see the hermit. He said that he had the information that the king was visiting the hermit alone, and I decided to kill you on your way back. And so the bearded man had a plan to kill the king when he would return from the hermit's house, from the hermit's hut. But when the whole day passed and you did not return, I left my ambush to seek you out. So when the whole day was past, when the day was over, so he left the plan of attacking the king surprisingly, and he decided to find him out, and came upon your knights instead. And as the king went there with his knights, so the knights find that bearded man. They recognized me. The knights, after recognizing the bearded man, fell upon me and wounded me. They wounded the bearded man. I escaped from them. He said that he fled away from them. But I should have bled to death if you had not cared for my wound. Then the injured man said that I would have died, he would have died if the king had not taken proper care for his wound. I intended to kill you. I decided to kill you, and you have saved my life. He said that he had the intention to kill the king, but it was the very king who saved his life. Now, if I leave, and if you wish it, I will serve you as your most faithful slave. So he is saying that if the king wish, and if the king grant him the permission to leave, because he is revealing everything he decided to do. So if he leave, he would wish to serve the king as a faithful slave and bid my sons to do the same. And he would also ask his sons to be slaves to the king. Forgive me. Then he again asked for forgiveness. The king was happy to be so easily reconciled with his enemy. And he not only forgave him, but promised to return his property and send his own physician and servants to attend him. Reconciled means to be friend with a person after an argument or after something bad had happened between them, something bad incident. So they were reconciled again, and it was not simply the forgiveness to remember. The king did not simply forgive him, but promised that he would return the seized property, that property would be given back to that person, and he would send his own physician to provide him medical help, and he would send the bearded man some of his servants to attend him, to take care of him. Having taken leave of the wounded man, the king went out to look for the hermit. So the bearded man left, and now was the time for the king to find the answers of his questions. So he again went on looking, seeking the hermit. Before leaving him, he wished for the last time to ask him to answer his questions. The king tried one more time to get the crucial answers from the hermit. The hermit was on his knees in the yard, sowing seeds in the beds that had been dug the day before. The hermit was sowing seeds. The hermit was busy doing his own activity. The king approached him and said, "For the last time, wise man, I ask you to answer my questions." The king went closer to the hermit and said that the last time he was asking for the answers. "But you have already been answered," said the hermit. The hermit said that the king had already got the answers. Squatting on his thin calves and looking up at the king who stood before him. He was looking at the king, and the hermit was squatting on the ground because he was sowing the seeds. "How have I been answered?" asked the king. The king was wondering because the hermit gave him no answer at all. "How?" repeated the hermit. The hermit was also wondering. And then the hermit goes on saying, "Had you not taken pity on my weakness yesterday and dug these beds for me instead of turning back alone, that fellow would have assaulted you, and you would have regretted not staying with me." So the hermit said that if the king had not considered his weakness the previous day, if the king had not helped him digging those beds, if the king decided to return back alone, then that fellow would have killed the king. And then the king would have no other option rather than regretting, rather than feeling sorry for leaving the hermit. Therefore, the most important time was when you were digging the beds. So the hermit said that the most important time was when the king was digging the beds. I was the most important man. The hermit was the most important man. And the most important pursuit was to do good to me. And the most important work was, at that moment of time, to do good to the hermit. And later, when that man came running to us, and when that bearded, wounded man, when that injured man came running, then the most important time was when you were taking care of him, when the king was nursing him. For if you had not bound up his wounds, he would have died without having made peace with you. So if the king did not take care of that man, then the man would have bled to death. And then there would have no chance for reconciliation. Therefore, he was the most important man. The injured man was the most important man. And what you did for him was the most important deed. And The way the king nursed him, that was the most important deed. Remember then, there is only one important time now. So the most important time in the opinion of the hermit is now. And it is important because it is the only time we have dominion over ourselves. Why the present time is so important? Because only in present we have control over ourselves. We can decide what to do and what not to do. And the most important man is he with whom you are. For no one can know whether or not you will ever have dealings with any other man. And the most important person is the person you are with now. That is the most important person. And the most important pursuit is to do good to him. And the most important work is to good to that very person. Since it is for that purpose alone that man was sent into this life. And the hermit said that for this purpose only man has sent into life, not to harm others, but to do good to others.